Hello YouTube, Dave here again. So recently I had someone ask if I could start doing a series of videos on just some guidelines or suggestions for beginner players or dungeon masters that are getting into, well, really any role-playing game and finding themselves feeling forced to run everything specifically how the rules are written in the book. I think it's important for anyone when you're learning a game to understand how all the rules work and to make sure that you do have that basis of knowledge there. But at the same time, you shouldn't feel constrained by the rules either. If there's something in one of the role-playing books or a rule set that you're not a big fan of, then you should, as the person running the game, should have the freedom to make those sorts of changes. A couple weeks ago I did a video on a variant version of the Beholder where I removed or changed the eye rays the way that they were before and modified that. So if you want to watch that, that video if you haven't already, then that can give you some ideas of ways that you can maybe modify a monster. But today I want to talk about modifying an aspect of a player character class. And specifically, I want to talk about the D&D 5th edition Ranger. So the Ranger class has been pretty much my favorite class for a very, very long time. I actually remember when I was a lot younger, and people may find this kind of amusing, but I actually really loved the movie Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I had a bunch of the action figures. I loved the movie. I liked they had an animated series that was sort of based off the toy line, and I used to love all of that stuff. And I just really, really loved archery as a result. And when I first started getting into Dungeons & Dragons, starting with the 2nd edition AD&D version of the game, they used to have a thing in all the class descriptions sort of explaining how you could, or comparing the classes in the books to real life or, mythological counterparts. And one of the first things that they mentioned for the Ranger class is that, an example of like real world or fictional Rangers that people may be familiar with was Robin Hood. So I was really, really into the Ranger class from that point on, and it hasn't been an easy ride for the Rangers. They've sort of had some ups and downs, and with the release of 3rd edition, I think they hit a pretty low point in terms of how good the class was, and 3.5 fixed a lot of it. 4th edition, I think the Ranger was still a pretty strong class, and in 5th edition, unfortunately, they seem to have slid backwards again. One of the earlier Unearthed Arcana articles was actually a variant version of the Ranger class. Now, I don't want to go into changing every single aspect of the character class because that's a bit more involved than I really want to get. However, I think that the Ranger could be saved by modifying just one of their class features, and it would make them a lot better. Sorry about that, I forgot to turn the ringer on my phone off. I don't get calls very often, so I don't think that's going to happen again. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying before is I think that it would be a pretty easy change to modify one of their class features and make the class just better as a result. And the feature that I want to talk about today is the favored enemy ability of the Rangers. So historically speaking, even going back to their very first appearance in an issue of the Strategic Review, which was the periodical put out by TSR prior to the invention, or prior to the release of The Dragon, which was the magazine that became quite well known from that point forward. The Ranger class has always had sort of like something to do with particular types of enemies. So in the Strategic Review as well as 1st edition AD&D, they had a list of creatures that were considered to be of the giant subtype, which included things like giants, ogres, I believe trolls was on that list, and I want to say gnolls were as well. Keep in mind that gnolls were initially a combination of a troll and a gnome. So back in the original 0 edition D&D, and I think the Ranger class for the Strategic Review was actually designed for that version of the game, but I'm not 100% on that. But then you also had things like goblinoids, which again sort of made sense. You had goblins, bugbears, and hobgoblins. But then, interestingly enough, they also had kobolds as part of that list, and I definitely would not consider a kobold to be part of the giant subrace, but nevertheless, there you go. And so when a ranger was fighting any of those creatures from the list, and I may have missed one or two, they would deal an extra point of damage per ranger level. So if you were a 10th level ranger and you were fighting a giant, you would deal an extra plus 10 damage with each hit. So it was a pretty powerful ability. The balancing feature with that is that rangers were slow to level up, and gaining levels was slow in the first place. So that was sort of how they balanced it there. In 2nd edition AD&D, the ranger's favorite enemy was something like a type that you chose, and whatever type you chose gave like a list of things, you know, within it. So you could choose like giants, you could choose some types of humanoids, you could choose undead. There was a list of things that you could choose from, and I believe you received a +4 bonus on attack rolls. So you were better at attacking them, but the damage was normal. And I think that was, again, just trying to counteract how overpowered the ranger's favorite enemy ability was, even though it didn't have that name in 1st edition, just how powerful it was. In 3.0, the ranger's favorite enemy became almost useless. So at 1st level, they chose a favorite enemy, and then every 5 levels thereafter, they got a new one. Or sorry, every 5 levels, they gained a new favorite enemy. So at 1st level, they had 1. At 2nd level, they had 2 favorite enemies. At 10th level, they had 3, and so on. The issue with it is that they received just a static +1 bonus to damage against that favorite enemy. However, when they gained a new favorite enemy, that new favorite enemy had a +1 bonus to damage, and then their any favorite enemy that they had prior to gaining this new one also had their damage go up by 1. So if you were 10th level, for example, your second favorite enemy would give you a +1 bonus to damage, and then your first favorite enemy that you had back at 1st level now had a +2 bonus to damage. When you gained your third favorite enemy, your very first one had a +3. When you gained a fourth, your very first one had a +4. And when you finally gained your 5th favorite enemy, your first favorite enemy got a +5 bonus to damage against them, and then your second would be +4, +3, +2, and +1. The issue with that is that the bonus was not very good until you reached higher levels, but you weren't likely to be, like, if you wanted to get use of your favorite enemy feature right away, you would choose things that you would expect to fight at 1st level, like goblins, kobolds, orcs, things of that nature. However, that would be sort of a short-term payoff, but by the time you reach higher levels and you would really want a decent bonus to damage, say like a +4 or +5, you're not going to be fighting goblins or orcs or kobolds or anything like that at, like, say 20th level. So a lot of players who played a ranger would basically choose something at 1st level that they knew they weren't going to get any use of until they reached higher levels. So you'd be having things like evil outsiders or dragons or, you know, stuff of that nature, or giants that they were choosing for their favorite enemy bonus, and they just weren't getting any use of it at low levels. In 3.5, they actually did a pretty good fix to the favorite enemy ability. So in 3.5, when you gained your first favorite enemy, it was a +2 bonus to damage against whatever the type of creature was. And when you gained a new favorite enemy, that new favorite enemy also received a +2 bonus to damage, but you had another floating +2 that you could assign to either your previous favorite enemy or your new one. So, for example, if you chose like orcs or goblins at 1st level, by the time you reach 5th level, you might be fighting things like, you know, undead, or you might start to fight some evil outsiders, or you may even fight a couple of dragons. So you could choose one of those, and instead of having your oldest one, which you're probably not going to get much use of anyway, automatically getting bumped up, you can instead have +4 against your new favorite enemy. And that was sort of the best way to do it, is when you gained a new favorite enemy, you would choose it and put your floating +2 bonus into that as well, but you could have some customization to it. So I thought that was a pretty good way to go about it. In 4th edition, they didn't have favorite enemy per se, but they had, I think the ability was called Hunter's Quarry, which allowed the ranger to mark a target, and once per turn, they could deal an extra 1d6 damage against it. The downside is that it was once per turn, but the upside was that you could simply just mark whatever target that you wanted to, and when you attack them and hit them, you would be able to deal that extra damage once. So that was sort of, again, a bit of a trade-off for the removal of the traditional favorite enemy ability. But when we come to, so the themes from 1st edition all the way up to 4th edition is that the Ranger's sort of favorite enemy type ability either made you better at attacking the enemy, or in pretty much all cases but one, gave it so that you did more damage. So that made the 5th edition Ranger feel pretty underwhelming. And so with the 5th edition Ranger, what we have is their favorite enemy. You choose one type of favorite enemy. So you choose from aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, giants, monstrosities, oozes, plants, or undead. Or you could choose a humanoid type, and you get to choose typically 2 of them. So you could just have like goblins and kobolds as your favorite enemy. You have advantage on survival checks to track them, as well as knowledge checks to recall information about them. And you gain one of their, and you gain a language associated with them. So if you chose giants, for example, you would get the giant language. It has to be one that's associated with the creature as well. And that's it. That's what you get as a favorite enemy. And again, favorite enemy is one of the Ranger's more defining class traits, and it's just really, really underwhelming. They do get like their primeval awareness ability at 3rd level, which allows them to sense the presence of their favorite enemy within a certain range, but they still get no real mechanical benefits to having them, other than, yeah, you can track them and stuff like that. But, again, if the adventure relies on you finding these creatures, then you're going to find those creatures regardless of your bonus to track. And, getting the language is cool, but that's it. Like, that's all that favorite enemy really does is, give you the language thing. So that's the ability that I want to focus on here today. And as a result, it is going to also alter one other class feature that they don't get until 20th level. So I've been thinking of different ways to adjust the Ranger's favorite enemy to make it a little bit more, basically useful. And I looked at the Variant Ranger, and the Variant Ranger was interesting in that, it gave you a +2 bonus to damage against your favorite enemy, which, okay, that's fair. And then at 6th level, you gain your new favorite enemy, and then it increases the damage to like +4. And I can't quite recall if it keeps doing that, if the damage bonuses keep going up exponentially like that, or if it caps. And so if anyone's read that recently, or I can even put a clarification in the description below. But basically, I'm still not the biggest fan of that. And having a +4 bonus to damage at 6th level does feel a little bit powerful, in my opinion. So not super powerful, but it's still, I think there are better ways to go about doing that. So the suggestion that I have, and the way that I would house rule Rangers in my home campaigns, is that their favorite enemy ability allows the Ranger to add their proficiency bonus to damage rolls against that target creature. So if you choose, like, say, dragons, when you fight a dragon or something with the dragon type, you deal your proficiency bonus. If your proficiency bonus is +2, you add +2. If it's +4, you add +4. If it's +3, so you get the idea. It also allows the Ranger's favorite enemy ability to scale as they go up in level, but it never really gets out of hand. It gets to a maximum of +6 at, I think it's like 17th level. So, and by then there's all types of other ways to increase damage and stuff like that. So I don't think it's an ability that's going to necessarily break the game. With that in mind, however, I think there are some decisions that need to be made. For example, when you choose a humanoid type, the way that it's currently written, you get to choose 2 different humanoids that you get to apply as your favorite enemies. And if you're adding extra damage to them now, I don't necessarily think that that's the best the way to go about it. I don't know if it would honestly break the game again, because, you know, if you have, say, goblins and kobolds, or goblins and orcs, or gnolls, you know, the odds are that, you know, you're probably not going to have every adventure that you're in revolve around those types of humanoids, so it's not like it's going to be something that's just constantly going to be affecting encounters. But at the same time, I do wonder if maybe it would be best if they simply chose a single humanoid or a humanoid type. So, for example, they could choose goblinoid, and that would affect goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears. And then you could have things like reptilian humanoids, you know, which would be like troglodytes and lizard folks and stuff like that. But ultimately, that's a decision that I think you would have to make. I would probably err on the side of having you choose a subtype of humanoids, and that be your choice for your favorite enemy, instead of two specific humanoid types, or two specific humanoids. Just choose like a creature type for them and sort of go from there. But again, that's up to the individual. It's up to the individual dungeon master or people or individual who's looking to run a variant of the ranger class. But I think overall, the big fix is adding their proficiency bonus to their damage rolls, and it just, again, they train to fight this enemy, so it sort of makes thematic sense. This does sort of impact the Foe Slayer ability that they get all the way at 20th level. And the Foe Slayer ability is, again, sort of underwhelming as well. And what Foe Slayer is it allows you to add your Wisdom modifier to a damage roll against one of your favorite enemy types once per turn, or once per round. Now, the issue with it really is that Wisdom, while it's their spellcasting stat, is probably not going to be the Ranger's first, or necessarily even their second highest stat that they have. You're probably looking at something like Dexterity and or Strength for the first one, and, you know, probably Constitution would be a good second, with Wisdom really being third. Not a ton of Ranger spells require a saving throw to overcome. Not that there aren't any, but I can't honestly think of too many off the top of my head, and many of their other spells are dependent on making a normal, like a ranged weapon attack roll, so ranged or melee weapon attack roll. So the fact of the matter is that, once again, it's not something where they're necessarily making spell attacks either. So having it be their Wisdom score it's okay, but once per turn is just, you know, again, kind of, it's just not great. So the solution that I would have to that is basically just change it to a flat bonus that they can add their Wisdom modifier to damage rolls on attacks made against their favorite enemies, and just basically remove the once per turn. The other issue with it is that it's, you know, when you're adding like your Wisdom modifier, it just seems like your knowledge of the creature, the way that you understand how they work, that, you know, allows you to add that extra damage in the first place. So why is it only once per turn? Like, do you suddenly forget how to damage them more effectively? And keep in mind, Rangers, you know, aren't going to get a ton of attacks. They don't get the number of attacks that a fighter does. They get one extra attack, and if they're using the 2-up and fighting, then you can get up to 3 attacks per round. But that's pretty much it. Like, they don't get a third or fourth attack the way that fighters do. So I don't think it's going to be a huge thing allowing them to add their Wisdom modifier to all damage rolls against their favorite enemy types. But anyway, but again, that's the decision that each individual dungeon master looking to run a game will need to consider. So I guess the question that I have for anyone watching is, how would you modify the Ranger class? And again, I don't want huge sweeping changes to all of their features, but what one change do you think you could make to make the class a bit better? And it doesn't have to apply to just the Ranger class. You know, you could apply this to really any class. What one change do you think you could make that's pretty minor overall that you think will make the class better? And as a new player or a new dungeon master, if you're beginning, let me know if you're watching this video. Is there an element of the game, one of the rules sets that, or an aspect of the rules that you're not a big fan of, but you feel like you have to implement because it's just written into the game. And, that could be the subject of future videos to help. But I hope that at the very least, this sort of identifies a way or a means of thinking that you can use as someone who's new to modify aspects of the game that they're not a big fan of. Again, you can also go back and watch my video on house ruling the 5th edition Beholder if you want an idea on how to sort of adjust some monster types. So again, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope that the ideas weren't too bad that I present here. I'm not a game designer. I'm not a professional writer for anything. So I'm not saying that my solution is the best way to go about it, but it's what I think works for the games that I want to run. And so keeping this in mind for this kind of video series, next week I have something that I want to discuss about an aspect of the rules that I'm not a big fan of and want to house rule. So be sure to come back next week for that. So we've looked at a monster, we've looked at a class, so tomorrow we're going to look at an entire rule set that I want to modify for my games. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Take care.